So my name's Peter Anderton. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I heartily agree with what Grant has been saying. I think there's some really key messages we can be thinking about from a leadership perspective. Let me just tell you a tiny bit about who I am, and then we'll move away from that. I'm actually a chartered engineer by background. I'm also a chartered fellow of the CIPD, so I've brought the sort of the technical side with the soft and woolly side together. So I'm a hybrid, if you like. My background has been from manufacturing systems engineering through to production management, and then around about the turn of the millennium I crossed over to the dark side and joined HR. And worked through 3M, a range of different roles till I became the organisational development manager across all of the UK. Whole range of different exciting things that I've been involved in. And essentially what I do is I help MDs and chief execs deliver a lot more change with a lot less effort. And I do that by creating alignment in their senior leadership team. And for me, it's absolutely about that alignment. If you've got everybody pointing in the same direction, there's very little that you can't achieve. So let's think about that for a moment, because there are a lot of things in life that are better when they point in the right direction. Cars in the carriageway would be an example. Slates on your roof, magnetic north, and of course, people in your business. But if that's not how things are right now, then basically you can find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with quite a different scenario altogether. And I've got some messages for us to think about, if this doesn't apply to you, that have arisen from the messages that come from packaging chocolate hobnobs. You'll be wondering what the connection is, and hopefully we'll see more of that later. But before we begin, I've actually got a special test for you. Now I asked Christine if she could arrange some pen and paper. She should also have some pen and paper. I asked her about yesterday, so she would like to have had some far smarter pen and paper available for you, but that was my timing, entirely my issue. But what I need you to do is make sure you've got access to a pen and paper, because I've got some questions to ask you. And so if you've got pen and paper, I've got some questions to ask you. I'd like you to put your name at the top of the paper and numbers 1 to 10 down the left-hand side of the paper, because you're not going to be marking your answers to this. You're going to be passing this to the person next to you. This takes you back a bit, doesn't it? So I've got 10 questions for you. Now, something really important about these 10 questions. I'm only going to read each question once. Okay? None of them are to be repeated. If you say, Peter, can you just say that again? The answer is no. So are you ready? 10 questions. Question 1. Some months have 31 days, some have 30 days, but how many have 28 days? I'm going to go quite fast. Question 2. How many species did Moses take onto the ark? Question 3. Which is correct? The yolk of an egg are white, or the yolk of an egg is white? Question 4. A man living in London must not be buried in Birmingham. Why? Question 5. You're now running in a marathon and overtake the person in second place. What position are you now in? Question 6. You take 2 apples from 7 apples. How many apples do you have? Question 7. Technical one. Divide 40 by half and add 10. Question 8. The vet gives you 3 pills for your cat and tells you to feed it 1 pill every half hour. How long will they last? Question 9. If you're alone in a deserted house at night and had a lamp, a fire, and a candle and only had 1 match, which would you light first? Question 10. You need to pin your ears back for this one. You're driving a bus into the city centre. At the start, you have 2 passengers. At the next stop, 6 people get on and 1 gets off. At the next, 2 get on and 4 get off. 3 stops later, a group of 12 children crowd onto the bus and an elderly lady decides to leave. Just before the bus station, 1 nun gets on, 3 children get off, but 1 child gets back on when they realise they were at the wrong stop. The bus arrives at the station, still with a number of passengers. What is the age of the driver? Okay. So we'll come back to that later. That's going to be very relevant to us later on in this morning's session. So, as we come to leadership then, I believe the truth of everyday leadership has been buried deep. The last time I Googled leadership, I got 760 million results in less than half a second. Yeah, and the question becomes, how can you actually find the real answer amongst there? I don't know if you know, the average person in the UK spends up to 6 months of their life looking for lost items like keys or mobile phones. I can see some of you smiling. It might be longer in your households. And of course, the more stuff we have to work through, the longer it takes us to find them. Imagine searching through 760 million things to find your keys. And you'd think in the age of the modern information era, we'd have made this easier and more accessible. But in reality, what we find are thousands of different leadership models and theories that have created this complex tapestry of leadership that brings it to the point that it feels like something only a university professor can understand. But I'm here to tell you today that leadership is in fact incredibly simple. I'm not going to say to you that leadership is easy. That certainly wouldn't be the case. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and sometimes tears involved in leadership, but it is simple. And I genuinely believe that everything, and I mean everything, that we need to know about leadership boils down to one of two rules. And everything else is just noise. Just one of two rules, everything else is just noise. And if we get to grips with these two powerful rules, then you cannot fail to inspire others, whatever the situation. So we might ask the question, why this explosion in leadership models that have caused so much confusion? Well, I think this is the answer. Because instead of searching for the keys to leadership, I actually think the problem we have is that people are starting to look for the silver bullet instead. The one thing that solves all our problems in one fell swoop. The one new thing, the leading edge, the cutting edge thinking. If I can just get this lovely, shiny new silver bullet and load it into my gun and fire, everything will be well with the world. Everything will fall into place. And the paradox is, rather than simplifying the situation, the search for the silver bullet just buries the true message deeper and deeper. Now, I'm going to let you into a secret. People have been leading other people for a very, very long time. Centuries, millennia even. And the true messages go back a very, very long way. Now I'm not a professor. I'm not a politician. I'm certainly not a head of state. I'm not Einstein. I'm an engineer with a passion for leadership, simplicity, and alignment. And I've experienced leadership from all sorts of angles, and I've had great successes, and I've made some fairly huge mistakes. And because I've learned more from my mistakes than my successes, I'm going to share with you my greatest mistake today. Because in a very early incarnation, I used to be the man who ran the chocolate hobnobs packaging line. That was one of my first jobs. And this new line was the production problem of the entire factory. And I was the young hotshot who, irrespective of what the line had done to my predecessors, was going to come in and save the day. I was young enough and arrogant enough to think that all would be well and I would conquer this beast. How little we knew. And before we joined my worst ever shift, drowning in tons of chocolate hobnobs, we're going to go on a journey. We're going to strap ourselves into our plutonium-powered time machine. And we're going to go back to China in the 6th century, 6th century BC even. But before we go back, let's just recognize that we're going to go through centuries of leadership in under 15 minutes. So the one thing we can be absolutely certain of is we're going to leave a lot out. So let's go back. 6th century BC, Lao Tzu, famous for a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. He believed leaders were best when people didn't even know that they existed. When their aim was fulfilled, when all was achieved, the people would say, we did it ourselves. Not so far away, Sun Tzu was writing The Art of War, still on the recommended reading list for a lot of top executives around us today. And he believed that the general who advances without coveting fame, and who retreats without fearing disgrace, whose only thought is to protect his country and do good service for his sovereign, is the jewel of the kingdom. In the 1st century BC, the Roman consul Cicero believed a leader could only achieve great things by recognizing they were dependent upon others. The total picture was much, much bigger than themselves. In order to lead, they had to focus upon others. In the first century, Jesus of Nazareth taught, whoever would be great among you must be your servant. His disciples likened the relationship between leaders and followers to the relationship between a shepherd and a flock. Each of these, through history, agreed that leadership wasn't about dominion, it was about service, until we come to this gentleman here in the 16th century. The cunning Italian Niccolo Machiavelli wrote a famous book called The Prince, and he believed the leader should maintain power at all costs. He believed it was all about the leader. Everything was about them. Not only that, he believed the leader should appear to be one thing, whilst in truth being something else altogether. And we are still clearing up his mess today. Because although he added some brilliant insights into the perils of managing change, he took rule number one of leadership and he locked it up and he threw away the key. Leaping then into the 19th century, we come to the Scot Thomas Carlyle's great man theory. He believed leaders were born, not made. You either had it or you didn't. You were either a leader or a follower. If you had it, you would make great things happen. If you didn't, well, tough. You were either a manager or a worker. Never the twain shall meet. And in the early 20th century, Frederick Taylor was responsible for scientific management. He said, forget motivating people to work harder, just optimize the way their work is done. The right way to do a job was created, and the worker no longer had any control or responsibility for the way they did their work. And although scientific management was parked by the 1940s, the whole idea of his thinking still lingers on today like a bad smell. He created a massive gap between managers and workers. Managers decide how work is done. Workers do the work. Managers have all the good ideas. Workers put them into practice. Managers know the right way to do it. Managers have all the answers, or they're expected to. And workers know little or nothing. And each of these theories unraveled more and more ancient wisdom. And between them, they completely turned rule number one of leadership inside out and on its head. And then we come to trait theory. Made things even worse as experts searched for the characteristics, the traits of the perfect leader. What made them successful so we can measure them and develop them in other people. But this theory lost all credibility when the only statistically significant thing that they could come up with is that the greatest leaders were slightly above average height and slightly above average intelligence. So as they ran out of steam in their search for the perfect leader, they started to turn to what leaders did, and the behavioural model of leadership was born. Surely we could learn to copy the best leaders. And this saw the birth of the celebrity chief exec. We have celebrity bakers now, don't we? Celebrity chefs, celebrity interior designers. Well, the very first of their ilk was the celebrity chief exec. And their autobiographies were used like leadership manuals. And the whole ethos that sat behind these books was, if you want to be a brilliant leader, well, you need to be like me. You need to think like me. You need to talk like me. You need to dress like me. In fact, what you ultimately require is a frontal lobotomy, and then we can solve all your leadership problems. And this led to what Professor Richard Jolly from the London Business School refers to as the Heathrow Airport School of Management. This is what happened when a boss goes on holiday and recognises they've forgotten to pick a book. So they go to the bookshop. They go to W.H. Smith's in Heathrow Airport. And of course, the largest section is the business section. And they come away with the latest chief exec autobiography. And they devour it on holiday. And they come back trying to be exactly like this ultimate chief exec. And of course, it never works. It all starts to fall over after a period of time. And the really enlightened employees learn to buy their boss a novel before they go on holiday, just to short-circuit the whole problem. But this search for the perfect leader just keeps shoveling more and more stuff on top of rule number one. And you might be wondering what rule number one is. Well, rule number one of leadership is simply the most important thing about leadership. It's the essential starting point for every leader. Because what rule number one recognises is that as a leader, it's not about you. Ultimately, what we have to recognise when it comes to leadership is it's about them. Or to misquote Bill Clinton, it's about the people, stupid. Everything we ever need to know about leadership starts here. Eleanor Roosevelt put it like this. She said, a good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader. A great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. Of course, a leader's only a leader when they have followers, so it's tempting to create followers. But the best leaders don't seek to create more followers, they seek to create more leaders. Because the idea of the leader as the hero with all of the answers just doesn't work in today's world. The world is too complex for any one person to have all of the answers. Which brings us to a failing leader, quite literally surrounded by chocolate hobnobs. I was everywhere. Solving problems here, solving problems there, coming up with amazing ideas, working all hours, terrified I would let the side down and become a failure, because right then, it was all about me. It was all about my blood, my sweat, my tears, my ideas, and my ego. But I didn't get rule number 1. I was looking at it completely the wrong way around, and things just went from bad to worse. And my worst ever shift saw literally tons of chocolate hobnobs all over the floor. We were wading through the stuff. It was a complete and utter fiasco. And it applies to any situation, whether it's at work or at home. If you ever feel like everything is dependent upon you, if you ever feel like you're the only one who gets it and you're the only one who cares, then the key is to get back to rule number 1. And the fastest way to get back to rule number 1 is to listen. That's why I'm so pleased that Andrew talked about the PPMA as a listening organisation in his introduction. Listening is all about rule number 1. I'm going to ask you a question. Can anyone tell me, when we think we are listening to what somebody else is saying in a conversation, what are we usually doing instead? We're thinking about what we're going to say. That's essentially what's taking place here. Our attention isn't on them at all. Rule number 1 is where listening begins, because listening isn't actually a skill. Listening is a choice. Listening about whether we actually get rule number 1 or not. Because to truly listen, it has to be about them. As leaders, if we're simply waiting for them to finish so we can get our word in, then we're in danger of doing a lot more harm than good. Which brings us back to our earlier test. So if you'd like to pass your piece of paper to somebody next to you, it's time for us to go through the answers. Okay, are you ready? So question 1, some months have 31 days, some have 30 days. How many have 28 days? All of them. The answer is all of them. Okay. Question 2, how many species did Moses take onto the ark? None. Noah had the ark. So the correct answer is 0. Which is correct? The yolk of an egg are white, or the yolk of an egg is white? Neither. The yolk of an egg is yellow. A man living in London must not be buried in Birmingham. Why? Because he's still living. Correct. That could get you in a lot of trouble. You're running in a marathon and overtake the person in second place. What position are you now in? Second place. Good. All right, now you have to think about this. When you take 2 apples from 7 apples, how many apples do you have? You have 2 apples, because you took 2 apples. All right. Now, question 7. I'm hoping some of you got this one right. Divide 40 by half and add 10. The correct answer is 90. Correct. 40 divided by 0.5 and add 10. The vet gives you 3 pills for your cat and tells you to feed it 1 pill every half hour. How long will they last? 1 hour, beginning, middle, and end of the hour. If you're alone in a deserted house at night and had a lamp, a fire, and a candle and only had 1 match, which would you light first? The match. That's an old favourite, isn't it? All right. Now, I'm not going to read out question 10, but just put your hands up if you're confident you've got the right answer to the question. What's the answer, sir, there?
52.
52, and the reason being? You are the driver. The question began, you are driving a bus into the city centre. So if you don't know your age, we have a whole other issue. Now, can I just check? So, show of hands, did anybody get 10 out of 10? Was that a hand or a stretch? It was a stretch. It was a stretch. Okay. Anyone for 9 out of 10? 8 out of 10. Oh, fabulous. Give a round of applause for our 8 out of 10. Superb. Any takers for 7? A few more for 7. Excellent. 6? 5? Show of hands for 4 or less. You're not alone. Don't be shy. Okay. All right. Okay. No. Let me tell you, should I ask if anybody got 0? Yeah, it's a regular occurrence. If you got 0, trust me, you're not alone. But let me tell you, yeah, because it's not about you, it's all right. Let me tell you what we've just done. At the top of this page are the words, listening test. This wasn't an intelligence test. It wasn't a problem-solving test. It wasn't even an emotional intelligence test. It was simply a listening test. And how we listen is an incredibly powerful indicator of whether we've grasped rule number 1. Now, this was just a bit of fun. But how we listen in business is the ultimate indicator of whether we've really understood what leadership is all about. Because if I want to identify a great leader, I don't look at the leader. I look at the people around them. Because if it's all been about the leader, their ideas, their solutions, their direction, their vision, and their ego, then they'll have created followers around them, people who are dependent upon them. When a leader gets rule number 1, however, they create leaders, not followers. People who take 100% responsibility. People with a can-do mentality. People who solve problems themselves without constant input from the leader. Of course, this is a real challenge for us as engineers, isn't it? Particularly British engineers, because we love to solve problems. Give me a problem to solve. Ideas, solutions, it's fabulous. We're full of ideas and solutions. But if we are always the one doing the talking, if we are always the one solving the problems, then we create a dependency upon us. So when we look around for somebody else to pick up the baton behind us, there's nobody there. Because they're all waiting for us. All because we didn't get rule number 1. So if you do nothing else after today, one thing I'd really love you to do is to go back and give your teams a really good listening to. And see where that takes you. And as early as the 1970s, Robert Greenleaf brought back rule number 1 with his model of servant leadership. But it wasn't enough. One of the keys of leadership was still missing. And that key was rule number 2. So we're going to take our final stop on our minor journey here through centuries of leadership with authentic leadership. It's not the only leadership theory doing the rounds today, but it's the one that will take us to rule number 2. Authentic leadership isn't about a great man. It isn't about a fixed set of characteristics. It's simply that we need to be authentic, turning up at the top end of who we really are. It's less about trying to be somebody else, and it's more about being ourselves brilliantly. Authentic leadership is about having a clear understanding of who we really are, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and behaving in a transparent way that pulls all of these things together. John Maxwell talks about 5 levels of leadership. Level 1 is when people follow you because they have to. Level 1 in the biscuit factory meant a queue of people at the clock machine 5 minutes before the end of the shift, just waiting to slide their card through the reader the minute they were able to leave. This is where they follow you because you're the boss. This is where I'm going to disagree with the Right Honourable Tom Brake here when he's saying that it's all right for you, you're not dealing with volunteers, Because actually people will do what you tell them to do because you tell them to, because you're the boss. Because the problem we have here is when people follow you because you're the boss, that's where they give you their minimum. They never give you their best at that point. That's where you get the absolute minimum. But at level 2, they follow you because of the relationship that you have with them. At level 3, they follow you because of what you've done for the organisation. At level 4, they follow you because of what you've done for them as an individual. And ultimately, at level 5, they follow you because of who you are and what you represent. Each level represents a deeper level of commitment than the one before. And shifting from one level to the next is all about choice. But not your choice, their choice. That's rule number 1. If we have a boss, we have to work for them because they're the boss. That's leadership as a position. That's level 1 leadership. But when we choose to work for somebody because of what they do and because of who they are, then the sky's the limit. Apparently much misquoted, but no less powerful, the words, "be the change that you want to see in the world," bring us face to face with rule number 2. In fact, rule number 2 is as simple and as profound as rule number 1. Rule number 2 of leadership recognises that if you want the best from those around you, it starts with what you do and who you are. Because rule number 2 of leadership states that leadership is only about you. And a whole host of theories, from Avolios to Zalesnik, state that if we want to inspire others, it begins with who we are. And that was the second half of my problem. When the hobnobs and a lot more besides were going down the pan, I wanted everyone else to change. I felt like I was the only one who cared. I was the only one who really understood the situation. I was the last person who needed to change. They were the ones who needed to change. But the environment in my team and the piles of chocolate hobnobs that surrounded us was simply a reflection of me. Leadership and life is a lot like that. Things go pear-shaped from time to time, and it's very easy to blame other people, isn't it, when these things happen. But true leaders look themselves in the mirror and they say, if I want anything to be different, it starts with me. That's the power of rule number 2. Rule number 2 says, let's stop waiting for everybody else to get their act together and start cleaning up our own act. If others are ever going to live up to our expectations, it starts with us. How are we behaving? Are we standing up for what we believe? Or are we just doing time? What do we stand for? Who are we? Nelson Mandela absolutely nailed rule number 2 of leadership when he said, until I changed myself, I could not change others. But don't go thinking for a moment this is anything new. Back in the ancient world, Lao Tzu said, mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Cicero said the enemy is within the gates. It is with our own luxury, with our own folly, our own criminality that we must contend. And Jesus said, as you wish that others would do unto you, do so unto them. We can only make a difference by starting with ourselves, our own beliefs, our own thinking, our own behaviour. Ancient wisdom understood rule number 2 a long time ago. Rule number 2 recognises that people around us don't come with remote controls. If we want to change our environment, it starts by changing ourselves. Because as leaders, our thinking and our behaviour creates our environment. So it's time for us to ask ourselves, what environment surrounds us? What environment are we creating? Does it look like this? Or like this? Because there's no such thing as the silver bullet. If we want things in our organisation to be different, it starts with us. What impact are we having on those around us? Because the environment around us is a reflection of our own leadership. So if our organisation looks like this rather than this, or like this rather than this, then the solution is contained within rule number 2. So there it is. Everything you need to know about leadership boils down to one of two rules. Everything else is just noise. And the benefit of applying these rules in day-to-day business is they help you access what's already there, what's hidden in plain sight. Let me just explain. I don't know if you know, but in your petrol tank, only 20% of the fuel that you put in actually moves your car forwards. The rest of it goes on exhaust and friction and hysteresis and everything else. It's balmy. But it's a lot like that in business. Your wage bill is the biggest cost you've got. But how much of it is being wasted? All those whispered corridor conversations, people not being aligned, communication not being effective. It's holding you back. It's causing you work. And for many of you, it's costing you sleep. Applying the two rules of leadership allows you to tap into the 80% that's being wasted. And the best way to start is by asking the right questions. So, if rule number one has struck you this morning, you'll have understood it's not about your ideas. It's not about your solutions. It's not about your answers. You'll want to draw the answers, the ideas and the solutions from your team, rather than simply handing them yours. Now, I've got 3 sets of powerful questions that will get your team moving in the right direction. And if you would like a copy, you're welcome to them. But to save me carrying armful of paper on the underground, I can just email them across to you. All you need to do is just get out your phone and text 2 rules to 01408 955 020. That's all you need to do. Just text the word, no spaces, 2 rules to 01408 955 020. And if rule number 2 has really struck you today, then you'll understand that if you want to inspire others, it begins with you. You have to start it off. You have to lead by example. You have to act. These 3 sets of powerful questions will help you work with your team and turn up the dial and get them moving together in the right direction. All you need to do is text 2 rules to 01408 955 020. Or if you want to give me a card at the end of the session, I can send them along. You see, Henry Ford put it like this. If everyone is moving forward together, then success takes care of itself. That's exactly what rule number 1 and rule number 2 give you. But if you disagree, if you just don't get these rules, if you feel they're simply not relevant to you or your team, then all you need to do is leave your phone in your pocket. But let me ask you this one thing. Never mind the test we completed earlier. Would you pass the ultimate leadership test? If you were run over by a big red bus this afternoon, and I hope you're not, what would happen to your team? Would they continue to deliver without you? Or would the wheels start to come off? Would you pass the test? Because as Penny Ferguson says, the mark of an outstanding leader isn't how good a leader you are, it's how many leaders you develop. You've got a huge amount on your plate. But let me tell you one thing, if that's ever going to change, your most important role is to develop the next generation of leaders, to fill that leadership vacuum. No one will do it for you. If you don't do it, then rest assured you'll find yourself asking, am I the only one who gets it? Am I the only one who cares? Far more often than you would care to imagine. And it's completely within your gift to do something about it. Today, amongst the plethora of models and theories that surround us, we're simply rediscovering and repackaging what was understood a long time ago. And when it comes to leadership, there are too many people sat on the floor, surrounded by the packaging, playing with the boxes, rather than the messages right at the heart. And I'd love to say that the only leadership mistakes I've ever made involved hobnobs. But life's not really like that, and you and I know that. Life's a journey and we never stop learning. But whilst I continue to learn, few things give me more satisfaction than helping others along the way. We live in a complex age, and the one thing our age is crying out for is simplicity. So let's just take the lead with these 2 simple rules. Because there isn't a single element of leadership that doesn't hinge on these 2 principles. And just to conclude our first two messages today, let's just recognize there really is no such thing as the perfect leader. He or she simply doesn't exist. But the next best thing is a leader who really gets and uses rule number 1 and rule number 2. So for our third and final message, I don't know if any of you have key goblins at home, but our goblins are always watching. And whenever they see me getting ready to go out, they hide my keys. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight. Sometimes they're in the door in my jacket. Sometimes they're hidden under piles of stuff. And the really devious ones will also hide my mobile phone, but only when it's on silent. And just picture the scene on one of these occasions. I'm going round in circles, frantically searching for my mobile phone, ranting as I go, until I remember that although it's on silent, it's set to vibrate. So I call the number, and then I walk round in silence, listening carefully to discover what I believe is lost. And there it is, tucked into my shoe for some unknown reason. All I really needed to do was listen. And that's the thing. My third, my most important message on the keys to leadership. Maybe everything you need to succeed is already in your organization. Maybe you and your team already has exactly what it takes to achieve whatever you want to achieve. Maybe everything you need is already there, and all you need is to learn how to discover it. Because this is not about reading a book at Heathrow Airport. It's not about a quest for the mythical silver bullet. And it's not about the next fad in management thinking. This is about asking the right questions. And more than anything, it's about listening to the answers. Because, of course, it's not about you. And it's only about you. Thank you.